No, 100%. And, speaking of Thomas Jocelyn, I actually came across a tweet of his a while ago. Since the peace deal,
Yes.
For those of us not aware, since the peace deal, he's been quite invested in criticizing the peace deal with the Taliban. And the other day he wrote something saying that, the US and Zalmay Khalilzad are claiming that the Taliban are actually disavowing Al-Qaeda, whereas they haven't. And this is a win for the Taliban, and this is a win for Al-Qaeda and terrorism. And how do we address that?
So, one thing to say is that it's strictly speaking, it's true that they have not cut off links with Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah.
But they've made the same promise or whatever it was that they did before 2001, which was like, we won't allow Afghanistan to be used, for terrorism or whatever. So you can kind of understand people thinking this is like an empty promise or something that they can't guarantee. But at the same time, they have, like, from a purely practical point of view, you can say that they have no incentive to do this, to cut off Al-Qaeda. One reason being that Daesh is there. Daesh is not a very big group or anything in Afghanistan, but actually this sort of renewal of links with Al-Qaeda started in 2014 or 2015 when Daesh came, and the reason being that Al-Qaeda and Daesh are enemies, and the Taliban and Daesh are enemies. So enemy
of my enemy is my
friend. Of my enemy, exactly. And the other thing is that having effectively maybe not won, but at least not lost the war, the Taliban can say that they were vindicated in the sense that they stuck to their guns and they survived. So why should they disavow them now? So I can understand from an outsider's perspective that people being nervous that Al-Qaeda could get back and get a base or whatever. But the thing is that Al-Qaeda is, first of all, it's a very splintered network. It's not the same thing it was in 2001, where it was like a small group, but it was pretty. It had a lot of outside influence. 2001, and not just in Afghanistan, even in like Pakistan and like a few neighboring countries. It was a small group, but it had a lot of propaganda value, and also the money coming in, like that Osama bin Laden personally used to fund a lot of different things. So, you would even have some preachers like who would be like in mosques and stuff would be praying for Osama bin Laden, just because he had this reputation from the 1980s, like this guy gave up his wealth for jihad, etc. That's not really the case anymore. If Al-Qaeda have a base, and I don't think that this is a proper argument, but if they have a base, it's not in Afghanistan. It would probably be in Syria nowadays, where they have well, now it's called Tahrir al-Sham, but it used to be called Nusra, and they used to be loyal to Al-Qaeda, but even they have cut off their ties with Al-Qaeda. And there's like a small hardline group there that is still loyal to Al-Qaeda, but they're not that relevant. So
we've established that really and truly there isn't much reason for the Taliban to cut ties to Al-Qaeda purely because Al-Qaeda is not the menace, let's say, that it once was. But for those that are saying that these two are two sides of the same coin, or they're synonymous, or they're the same thing, what are the main differences that the Taliban have with Al-Qaeda? Why are they worthy of negotiating a peace deal with over the course of 18 months and not Al-Qaeda?
Right. So the one thing is that the Taliban are an armed militia or group that is whose aim is to control territory and govern it. Al-Qaeda's aim, just about from the start, was to start a whole domino of pro-Western or pro-US governments being toppled, and doing that by hitting the United States. So from that ideological perspective, there's a big difference. The Taliban isn't going to war with the whole world. If anything, they were very keen to get international recognition, to go to the United Nations, etc., etc. Um, I don't think this plays such a big role, but even theologically, the Taliban are basically Hanafis from Deobandi Hanafis from Afghanistan. They're generally like very strongly rooted there. Al-Qaeda, for the most part, you can it's a very scattered organization. It has is it often. One thing I will say is
I don't think we can downplay the theological aspect to it, because the whole war has been characterized. Afghanistan now serves as a microcosm of the war on terror, and the war on terror presupposes certain realities, and uses its own terminology, which can't really be held to account, because you'll be called all sort of. But I think you raise a very valid point about the theological differences. But so you will continue, Ibrahim.
So I was also saying that Al-Qaeda are very scattered. They're insofar as the group survives, its interests lie in continuing conflict. It doesn't have an incentive to not continue conflict.
Sure. Of course.
I think this is actually one of the differences that prompted their Syrian wing to break away from them, because the Syrian wing it's basically like a militia, right? Which was controlling northwest Syria. So they didn't want to go to war with the whole world the way Al-Qaeda did. For Al-Qaeda, it's very easy to wage war at somebody else's expense. They were in Sudan.
When you have no skin in the game.
Yeah, or like very little skin in the game.
Yeah.
They were in Sudan first, then they were in Afghanistan, then they were in Pakistan. They've had these little branches or whatever. And in most of these cases, the fact that they were able to survive or persist was largely because of circumstances prevailing in those countries. So, for example, in Somalia, there was the Ethiopian invasion, and Al-Qaeda's wing, their loyalists, Shabab, became much stronger as a result of that, because it broke up the host, the Islamic courts who were hosting them. They were very small before that. It was like literally a handful of individuals. And then in Afghanistan, the same thing. The Taliban were basically internationally isolated. They needed money, and they needed support of they needed military support, and they needed money, and Al-Qaeda was able to provide both.
But in recognition of the fact that I don't really remember those years, but if the Taliban were internationally isolated and they desperately needed the cooperation of the international community, was there not a recognition in the different capitals in the world, in the Western world, that if we leave them to be internationally isolated, they'll have no choice but to have to cooperate with a group like Al-Qaeda? Was there any, did anyone actually understand that, or was that really...
If I may, just 1 second. Syed Ibrahim, can you move the... Yes, please. Yes, thank you. It's all right. Okay, yeah. Okay, if I may interject, the thing is that before 1996, 97, Al-Qaeda as an entity wasn't a global threat. Okay, so isolating Taliban as a undesired political entity in Afghanistan and forcing them to do whatever, there wasn't really a conscious decision, and there were any pros and cons weighed against each other, because it took a while until Al-Qaeda became a global threat. Like after 9/11, people realized that this group is a global threat. But before that, they weren't really considered as a significant threat. So that's why people were also not really interested in whatever they do. And I would also like to remind you that the things that happen, historic events, they need to be understood as they happened at that particular moment. For instance, Osama bin Laden could not stay in Sudan anymore. Yeah, he was basically forced to come back to Afghanistan, and the previous jihadi authorities in Afghanistan, like the people who are now part of the current government, they issued him an Afghan passport. Yes, they issued him an Afghan passport. He was naturalized in Afghanistan as a citizen by them. So he came back into 1996 to Afghanistan, and when he came back, it was a convenient move by Al-Qaeda to move back and establish itself in Afghanistan, and for the Taliban. So there was no intention behind it previously. However, due to circumstances, these two groups, these two entities, move towards each other. So now, after 2 decades, things that are being said about Taliban and about their belief system, about their political outlook and everything, we have to understand how Taliban came in contact with Al-Qaeda in the beginning, and how did that happen. And if there is no clarity about that, we can't really understand the question that is now being asked. Why aren't they cutting ties with them? Like, the question presupposes a certain reality that must exist. So this is, I think, one of the issues that needs to be clarified. And if I may switch to another aspect of this whole conversation. See, when we are talking about Taliban as a political movement, a armed group or a terrorist organization, we have to understand that most of what is being said about the Taliban, primarily in the Western media and even by academia, is not entirely accurate, and that's why I think it's important to make a very clear distinction. Is that the Al-Qaeda movement is a Salafi jihadi movement. What does Salafi jihadi mean? First of all, the Salafi movement obviously is a modern revivalist theological group. They have their own set of beliefs and ideas, and Salafi jihadism came into existence during the 70s and 80s, when a lot of Ikhwanis, the Muslim Brotherhood, were imprisoned in the Arab world. They were imprisoned in Egypt, in Libya, in Syria, and in prison, while these leaders of Muslim Brotherhood and all these other groups, when they were in prison, they have sort of adopted the Salafi doctrines that were being spread by Saudis. So the Saudi Arabia was using Salafi theology and belief as an instrument to spread its influence around the world, especially in the Arab world, but also in other countries. And these guys who are imprisoned in Egypt and in Syria and in other Arab countries, in prison they sort of created a cocktail of Salafism and their own Muslim Brotherhood political outlook, and they came into conclusion that their political activism doesn't work, and they should switch to a more violent and militant approach in order to establish their utopian Islamic state in the Arab world. And this is the background of Salafi jihadism. So when we're talking about Al-Qaeda, we're talking about a very ideological movement which had a very specific ideological frame of reference. And then when we talk about Taliban did not came into existence because of some sort of ideological maturing process. That's not the case. This is also one of the things that is being repeated again and again, and it needs to be
by very famous Western academics.
Exactly. They're saying this on again and again, but the truth is that the Taliban movement are not as ideological as and doctrinaire as like Al-Qaeda or Daesh or even Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood, they clearly have a political outlook. They have these ideas and approach and. Yes, but the Taliban never had any thing of that kind, and what I don't know if you guys agree, but this is my own personal understanding of Taliban, is that basically this is a movement that came into existence as a reaction to a vacuum, a chaos that was prevalent in Afghanistan, and the reason why they still don't have a clear ideological belief system is because it was never really